Mindfulness is learning to talk to yourself. I think it's the most masculine, empowering thing you could do because it's having a positive internal dialogue, and that manifests in great things. Make trust your default, and you'll earn more, you'll be promoted more, and you'll be happier. Be soft and fluffy on the outside. Don't take any shit on the inside. Anytime you speak up, you either get what you want or you get what you need.
Why do you think that there's some positives related to our ego?
There's a healthy side of the ego, and it's faith in yourself. You should have some confidence, a little bit of swag, that no one's out of your league, that no business objectives out of your reach, that you could do these things. And the humility side is, no matter what happens, you can handle it. I'm a sucker for doing the difficult thing consistently because I've just seen what happens when you're consistent with those things that most people don't want to do.
Young and Profiters, do you want to live a more intentional life? Do you want more clarity? Do you want better decision making? To feel like you know exactly what you're supposed to do because you know yourself so well? If that sounds like you, then you might need a mindfulness practice. And when we think of mindfulness, we often think that mental health and mindfulness is for sad people, for people who need help. But it's not. It's for everyone, especially entrepreneurs like us who have so much going on. We need clarity in our lives. We've got such busy lives. We've got to slow down. And all mindfulness is asking ourselves the right questions. It's self-Q&A so that you can get clarity, so you can get intentional, and so you can know exactly what you need to do because you've thought it all through. And it aligns with your thoughts and your values and your experiences, and you're not just doing what everybody else wants you to do. That's setting you up for disaster. So joining us today on the podcast is Case Kenny. He's a mindfulness expert. He's an author. He's also an Instagram influencer who is famous for his shareable quotes. I've shared his quotes on Instagram 1,000 times. I'm sure you guys have shared them as well. You can't miss him on Instagram. And he's also the host of the popular podcast, New Mindset, Who Dis? So today we're going to discuss mindset. We're going to discuss his new book, That's Bold of You. We're also going to take a deep dive on his own journey and career because there's so much to learn within his story as well. Let's jump right into it. Here's my conversation with Case Kenny. Case, welcome to Young and Profiting Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And, you know, a lot of my listeners are male millennials. And I've heard in the past that you've called yourself a dude bro guy. And you also said that you share your feelings for a living. And I know that a lot of guys have trouble sharing their feelings, showing emotion. And so this first question is for all the boys. Can you explain to us how mindfulness can still be masculine and why mindfulness is something that every man should consider?
For sure. Well, as a millennial man myself, I think I can address that acutely. Over the years, I've referred to myself as a dude bro guy, just as a way to like ground myself and the brand for people to let them know really that I'm just a regular guy, like truly. Like I don't have a background in psychology or sociology or a training in some kind of meditation technique or anything like that. Really, really a regular guy, truly. Like I like house music, lifting weights, Chipotle. Like those are my hierarchy of needs. And you know, when it comes to saying I share my feelings for a living, I say that to really break down what mindfulness is in the most practical way. Because I think a lot of people, men in particular, we think about mindfulness. We hear this word. Personally, I'm 36. In my 20s, I used to think mindfulness was for other people because I would associate it with things like energy and vibrations and chakras and abundance and these things that really, as a man, a type A hustle mentality type man. I was like, well, that can't be for me. Like, I'm going to go out and get what I want. I'm not going to manifest. I'm just going to do the freaking thing. I'm going to do the difficult things and I'm going to have a great result. So I used to think that mindfulness was for other people. It's really when I came to understand how practical mindfulness is, how it truly is for everyone, and specifically what it is, that I came to really embrace its power and why I encourage everyone, men, women, it doesn't matter, but particularly men, to embrace it. I'll even give you an example from something recent I did, just to answer your question directly. You know, why should men have a mindfulness practice? Why should men share their feelings for a living? I recently led a mental health mindfulness guided journaling session for the Raiders, a group of 200 grown men, huge dudes who hit each other for a living, doing these techniques, feelings sharing techniques in the form of guided journaling. I'm not saying this just to create a nice narrative arc here, but they loved it. They wanted more of it. I do a lot of work with athletes, but I see it all the time with men. They love this kind of stuff. When we break it down into what it really is and stop thinking that it's this thing for, overly sensitive men, like mindfulness. When I approach mindfulness is not just knowing yourself and being present in how you feel. That's certainly a large part of mindfulness. Happy to talk about it. But at its core, mindfulness is learning to talk to yourself. So really think about it that way. It's your internal dialogue. It's how do you talk to yourself? And I think men are all about training their bodies. They're all about lifting, sports, these things. A big part of that now in sports culture and masculine culture now is learning to train your mind. So I think it's becoming a much more approachable topic when we break it down and we escape the thing that, sharing your feelings is a sensitive thing for people who, are not masculine. I think it's the most masculine, empowering thing you could do because it's learning to talk to yourself, having a positive internal dialogue, and that manifests in great things and being a man and doing all the things that make a masculine man great, but it starts there. I would start there as, just kind of encouraging people to really maybe redefine what they think about when they think about sharing your feelings and making it much more practical and approachable.
Yeah. And mindfulness is something that we hear a lot. And even though I've done many podcasts on the topic, it's still kind of a little bit unclear in terms of like what mindfulness exactly is. And when I was studying for this podcast, I heard you say that mindfulness is self-Q&A. And I just thought that was such a good definition. I've never really thought of it like that. And it's such a simple way of thinking about mindfulness. So can you talk to us about why questions and asking yourself questions and asking why is such an important part of mindfulness?
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for doing that research. I mean, I think when I say it's self Q&A, I mean that in the most practical way possible. There's a reason that I choose journaling, guided journaling, as like my preferred method of mindful practice. Like mindful, there's so many mindful practices, and they're all great, from yoga to meditation, of course, to therapy, to going on a walk, to doing sound therapy. These are all great things that are mindful habits. I think guided journaling is the best mindful habit because it encapsulates what I think is the crux of journaling, of mindfulness rather, which is self-inquiry, putting your feelings on trial. It's really asking yourself questions. And I say that because, a lot of times we think about mindfulness, again, to my point earlier, that mindfulness is being present. Yes, that's a big part of it. It's being present, mind, body. It's being present in how you feel. It's being non-judgmental of how you feel. But I don't think that's quite enough, because if you're into any of the work of, say, Michael Singer, or like, learning about the subconscious mind and where do our thoughts originate, a lot of the common understanding is that we don't initiate a lot of our thoughts. We receive a lot of our thoughts. So if we're only in receiving mode, in retention mode, and we're not in intention mode, we're missing half the battle. And that's why when I say Q&A is saying, I receive these thoughts. Maybe they're mine, maybe they're not. Now it's time to figure that out with question, answer. And that's why I say, mindfulness isn't just listening to yourself. It's the second part, which is talking to yourself. And how do you know what to say to yourself? How do you know what you need to say to yourself? Well, you start asking yourself questions. So that's why Q&A, I think, is a really practical way to put it. Guided journaling is a great way to bring that to life. And then, past journaling, it's a matter of just living that as a mentality, that when you receive a feeling, you feel it, you receive it, you don't judge it, but then you start asking questions of it. And that's when you get to the bottom of whether you're receiving it and initiating it, whether it needs some intention and some examination. But I think, Q&A is a good way to describe it.
Are there any signs or symptoms that you need more mindfulness in your life?
I think everyone needs more mindfulness in their life. I don't know. I mean, I'll tell you, like, the reason that I started my whole journey into this, I think, is one that is probably pretty common. In my 20s, I very, very much identified with my job, which was great. I worked in advertising technology sales. It's one of those hustle things. You can make a lot of money. You could do really well. I really liked who I'd become over the course of that. I started as an account executive at this company, worked my way up to regional vice president, as sales leader. We close deals. We take clients out. We entertain, close deals, right? Really had become, type A, could turn on the charisma, do this thing. That was me on the outside. But on the inside, I did not feel like I knew who I was at all as a man, like as a person. I felt like I was borrowing a lot of definitions of happiness, success, timelines, all these things. And so, for me, the catalyst for all this, maybe that some people can relate to is I just felt like there were so many different versions of me. There was work case and dating case and friend case, all these different things. And I was like, I don't like that fact. I just want to be one person. And sure, you maybe behave different in different settings because, practicality. But I did not like the fact that I felt like I was borrowing and rushing and I had all these different masks that I would put on. I was like, I want to be this one person. And I want to say why I'm this one person and where that truth is coming from, not borrowing it from other people. So that's why I started the podcast. I would just hop on the podcast without a guest. And for like 20 minutes, I would just take a feeling or a question and I would examine it so that at the end of it, I could say, here's what I believe and here's where it came from, as opposed to I believe this thing, but I don't really know why. I don't really know where it came from. And I think a lot of people, we're not bad people, but a lot of people live that way, right? We have certain ideals and timelines and values even that we just have, but we don't know where they came from or why we believe them. And I think in that instance, we need mindfulness. We need introspection to say, I believe this because, and here's the experiences in my life that led me to it. That is the power of mindfulness in the matter of identity. And then we all need mindfulness when it comes to stress and anxiety and dating and all these areas of life where we're so quick to jump to conclusions. Mindfulness is the pause in that allows us to then initiate some Q&A and then come up with, in my world, I'm really into encouraging optimism, but to come up with more hopeful conclusions about life, whether it's your character, who am I, rushing, borrowing, or it's in the immediate, reacting to stress. I think we all need an element of mindfulness, certainly.
I have a quote from you that I think kind of relates to this, the fact that mindfulness is something that you kind of always need. It's something that never really ends. There's always going to be things that come up and you're going to need to figure out and think them through. So you said, I understand that there's no right way to live my life, but there is a wrong way. The wrong way is to think that there's a right way. To assume there's a right way would be happy, a right way to have a career, a right way to be in a relationship, to be successful, to be fulfilled. Can you help us understand what you mean by this?
Yeah, that's always the soundbite that I drop. So you got ahead of it before I would just say that to you anyway. I mean, I think the idea is that there are so many areas of life where we think there's a right way to do things. And maybe there is a right way. Maybe there absolutely is a right way to be in a healthy relationship, to start a business, to be profitable. Maybe there actually is a textbook right way. But I've found so much freedom and truth, although that's, I always think it's funny when people say, like, what is my truth? But like clarity when it comes to figuring out what works for me. And if we're always caught in a cycle of trying to emulate other people's right way, or only doing what our parents told us was the right way, or previous generations, we're stuck in a cycle that truly doesn't allow us to breathe. So that sounds more rebellious than it needs to be, but I really think a life truly lived is a life where you're saying, okay, I'll be inspired by other people, I'll look to other people, but I'm going to figure out what is the right way. And I think this is just so helpful across the board. Two examples. One, my life as an entrepreneur, I joke that I share my feelings for a living. But that's kind of a unique profession, right? Like, I'm an author, I'm a podcaster, I'm these new age things that are becoming more and more doable and achievable. But like, I had a great career before this, and I threw it all away to do something that is so out of left field for me. Like, my brother's a cardiologist, went to Harvard. My mom was a lawyer, like very traditional career paths. If I, back in the day, before I started kind of getting into mindfulness and self-introspection, if I would have said, Case, you're going to quit your job and you're going to write quotes on the internet for a living, I would have said that's a ridiculous thing. Of course not, because that's not the right way, right? Just practically, I would have said. So that's example one. Example two is I talk a lot about dating, but like in dating, I think that one of the quickest ways to give yourself anxious thoughts that are so unnecessary, even one of the quickest ways to ruin your relationship, is to look at other people's relationships and say, well, that's the right way. Mine doesn't look exactly like that. Therefore, mine's the wrong way, even though it's a perfectly healthy relationship. Or you look at the latest, hottest influencer and what she or he is saying that they need in a relationship. And you're like, well, I don't really want that or need that, or my needs are different. Maybe there's something wrong with me. We're so quick to add this anxiety to our life that is not necessary because we've defined things by right and wrong, the way, my way. And I think there's such a form of both peace and power that comes from deciding what is right for you. I think this goes across the board, but it's, basically just not, I hate to be like guy who's like, don't just do what you're told. But I think there is an element here of introspection that comes down to the ultimate question for mindfulness, which is why? Where is that why coming from? Is it coming from theory? Is it coming from what you've been told? Or is it coming from your experience? Like our experiences in my line of mindfulness, right? There's different kinds of mindfulness. There's like more spiritual, kind of esoteric mindfulness. For me, my mindfulness is almost like being a lawyer. Here's the evidence. Here's the conclusion. Jury, what is your verdict? It's like, I've lived through this. I believe this. Here's what I'm capable based on what I believe because of my experiences. I've lived through A, I believe B, and so on and so forth. And I think that is the power for us to decide what is right for me might not be right for other people. What's wrong for someone else. Someone says, Case, you can't make a living from sharing your feelings online. That might be right for me. And I think there's just freedom that comes from embracing the bridge between those two.
Yeah. I'd love to stick on your personal story for a minute here, because I think a lot of people are in the shoes that you once were when you were in corporate. You've got these other desires. You've got an amazing, cushy job. You're worried about what's going to happen if you leave that all behind, if you fail. You've got the pressure of your family who's really successful and had traditional jobs. So talk to us about how you guided yourself to make the decision to follow your dreams and to become an entrepreneur and a podcaster.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. There's a couple elements. For one, there was a timing element, which I think is the most important element ever. It was like, when do you make that jump? I see a lot of people, and there's no right or wrong answer here. From my experience, I see a lot of people jump too early. And I think having leverage when you leave your day job to move into full-time into your entrepreneurial effort, your creative effort, whatever it is, leverage is the most important thing you can have. That is financial leverage, of course, but also like decision-making leverage. Like I did the podcast for almost 3 years concurrent to my job. I would run the sales team. I would travel twice a week. I was out of Chicago. I'm in Miami now, but I was out of Chicago, and I would go to St. Louis and Kansas City, and I would run the region. And I was traveling twice a week. And I would produce 2 episodes a week of the podcast. Found a way to make it work. Somewhere along the way, I started to find a way to make money. I started to create and sell these guided journals. So I started getting these proof points. Oh, there is a business model, right? It's not just fanciful thinking. I've got historical data to support that I can make money every month, $5,000, $10,000, so on and so forth. So I started to create some proof that this was possible. Ultimately, for me, the story, COVID hit, it pumped the brakes on all my travel. I was like, wow, I've got some free time here. Really started to dive into social, posting more on social. There was this large and heightened demand on the e-commerce front, as well as demand for wellness products. And, I went from selling, a couple journals a day to hundreds a day. And, the thing blasted off, and it became very apparent that, I'm making more money doing this than my day job. Here's a real opportunity. But back to my point about leverage, if I had jumped too soon, I would have lost all that leverage, specifically in the form of decision-making leverage. Like when you leave too soon and you jump into your effort, and let's say you're a creator, a writer, a podcast host, and you rely on maybe advertising or, collaborations and things like that. When you're not making money, and when you don't have the financial foundation of a day job, money comes to you, opportunity comes to you, you basically have to take it to survive. And it takes out that decision-making leverage. I left after having a couple years worth of the data and the support, and I could turn down deals. I could continue to say, here's the brand. I'm not just going to take money because I need it. And I think that was really, really important to me, especially in the wellness space where, I'm not an influencer. I don't really do brand deals, but there was some time there I was like, well, I might need to, I need the money. I need to do these things. And I think having been more patient, leaving that job allowed me to leave and then continue saying, nope, this is what Case is. This is what I represent. I don't have to do these things. And I think that was really important to me. At a certain point, just with the timing and COVID and more time on my hands, I just realized that, if I poured more energy into this, I could do it. But I had that, years worth of data before to really put some fire on that.
Yeah. Young Improviters, you know me, I love a great deal just as much as the next person. But I'm not going to cut coupons or collect loyalty cards just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile told me it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, I didn't believe them. But turns out it really is that easy to get wireless for $15 a month. And Mint Mobile made it so simple for me to switch. Everything was online. It was easy to purchase, easy to activate, easy to save money. The longest part of the process was the time I spent on hold waiting to break up with my old provider. Well, good riddance to them because I'm saving so much money with Mint Mobile, and the quality of the phone service is just as good as my previous provider. It's high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can keep your current phone and your current phone number, so there's nothing to lose. I know for a fact that if you're not using Mint Mobile, you are definitely not paying anywhere close to $15 a month for your phone plan. Why not check it out? Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months of premium wireless service for just $15 a month. Go to mintmobile.com/profiting. That's mintmobile.com/profiting to cut your wireless bill down to just $15 a month. That's mintmobile.com/profiting. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 GB on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. We have a lot of similarities in our own stories. So, for example, I had a blog, a very popular entertainment news blog in 2012, 13, 14. I also started my podcast in 2018. I also quit my corporate job over COVID to start my social agency and now podcast network. So you took a different route. You did more of like the authoring and the journaling and really focused on becoming, a huge Instagram star. I really focus on building a company as well as my podcast. So we kind of take a different route. But I'd love to understand, something else that's interesting with your story is that even though you had this traditional job, you were still doing what I call opportunity set Bs, right? So opportunity set A is what you get paid for at your job. Opportunity set B is just anything else you can learn outside of your job. For example, you starting a blog, right? Because that was your own thing. You created that blog, right? And that was while you were working your corporate job. So talk to us about how that experience lent itself for you to even have confidence to become a podcaster and do your own thing, because I think it's probably all tied together.
Yeah. Oh, I like that a lot. I think about that a lot too. I've got a lot of empathy for people who are like, I don't know, investment bankers during the day, but rappers at night, where there's not a whole lot of like overset, not a lot of like transfer of skills, although maybe there is that I'm not thinking about. But for me, I started a blog called Pursuit in like 2014. So I go way back with like trying things on the side, but I'm super grateful that I was in advertising and sales specifically, and creative expression on the side. The confidence I got from my day job, walking into a meeting, having to entertain people, having to find a reason to strike up a conversation with people, having confidence in speaking and leading and empathy and working with a team, so transferable immediately to this. Like nowadays, I do a lot of public speaking and workshops with sports teams and corporate groups. Like I used to really be an introvert, and I used to be really averse to public speaking, truly. And now I love it. And it's not because I've been doing it a lot more now. It was because of the 8 years I ran a sales team and had to grow into that. So those skills were so transferable. And then also I would say there's something about working in sales in particular about, again, I was an introvert, started as an account executive. I was like, oh, little old me, I'm gonna sell a deal. By the end of it, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna sell a deal. Give me a bigger goal. Like, let's do this. Like, I want more commission. Like, I grew so much confidence in my ability to go from a book of business of 0 to selling in to Fortune 500 companies. I could go from 0 to nothing. And I think that really gave me the confidence on this side to say, I can go from having no social presence to having a bit large social presence, or having no books to having a book deal and a bestseller and these kinds of things. So I think those skills were very transferable and really helped me. And, I think it was right time, right place for sure for a lot of that. And, I'm very grateful for a lot of the perspective I learned along the way. And, I think I'm a very impatient person, truthfully. Like if I have to wait for an elevator or someone's walking slow on the sidewalk, it really irks me. But I think there was something that I'm really grateful for where, my intuition was saying, just be patient when it comes to the right time. So that when you when I did do that jump, I had that confidence in place, and I think that's guided me even 3 years later in the right direction.
I think the other thing is your consistency. The fact that when you were in a corporate job, you were saying even while traveling and having this full-time job, you were doing 2 episodes a week. Talk to us about your ability to be consistent and how you had the motivation when you first started. I know you did get quite a bit of downloads when you first started. But what kept you going before you were this super popular podcaster?
Yeah. Well, it's a very kind title. I think, well, I mean, first off is what I referenced earlier. Like I started the podcast for myself. Like I did not, someone messaged me the other day and they said, Case, like, can you give me some advice to be a successful podcaster? And I wrote back and I said, don't try to be a successful podcaster. Get a mission and use a podcast to amplify the mission. I think that's the only way in social, in podcasting, and writing. You can't just want to be an author or be a content creator. You have to have a fire for a thing, and then you use the platform to amplify it. For me, I never wanted to be a podcaster. I wanted to know myself better, truthfully. I know that sounds a little noble and like a nice little soundbite, but like that was the only reason I started the podcast. Alongside of, wanting to be creative. I've always been creative and, I love writing and expressing myself, but I truly started the podcast because I was frustrated with myself. And that's always kept me going. 630 episodes later, you can't help but grow. You talk about the 10,000 hour rule, whether that's real or not. I've done so much more than that. And I've grown and reinvented myself so many times. And I have so much clarity into myself that I can't help but grow every single time I sit down and do the podcast. So I've always been motivated to do it twice a week. And yeah, to your point, I mean, I was traveling twice a week. I would be doing the podcast in the back of an Uber. I would be writing it. I would be getting to the hotel late and recording it. I bring my mic with me on the road. Yeah, it definitely was difficult, but I think, it was a combination of what I just described, that internal drive. And then also, I got lucky. I remember my first month, I got 56,000 downloads, which, at our size, we're privileged to have large podcasts. Now, that's not a lot, but it's not insignificant. And for a first 1 month podcast, that's actually quite a bit. And I owe that to a couple of different things. Good timing. I had an email list at the time and it helped grow some of that. But I saw that. I was like, wow, if I could do that in 1 month, what could I do in a year? So I was like, I'm not going to stop until I have at least 50 episodes under my belt. And just committing to that 50, by the end of the 50, I was well beyond 50,000 downloads a month. And I was like, wow, let's just keep going. And by that time, the podcast had become a routine as simple as breathing. I know that sounds more poetic than it needs to be to describe releasing a podcast. But for me, it's like, I do it twice a week. Every Sunday and every Wednesday, I sit down and I write and I record and I release. It's just what I do. It's not like, oh gosh, like I've got to come up with content. What is my content strategy? It's like, no, I'm just going to do the thing because that's what I do on Sundays. That's what I do on Wednesdays. So for me, it's become that simple. It's like, it's a lifestyle at this point. And it works for me. But I mean, it's all those things combined and, creating evidence for yourself of why you should continue. Get out of theory, get out of writing down your goals and just like starting the thing, putting it on paper, seeing what people say, using that to inspire you, listen to your followers, all those things. For me, it always did start though with like why I started it in the first place.
I love that. I also love that you took sort of a self-journaling approach and you really just kept your podcast yourself. So many people go the interview route. That's the route that I ended up going with for majority of my episodes. And when I look back, because I started my podcast in 2018 as well, and similar to you, I had a corporate job. I'm like so proud of young Hala for doing episodes every week, even when nobody was listening. And to your point, my why was bigger than, just wanting to be a popular podcast. I literally just wanted to help people and had a lot of fun. I had like a volunteer team helping me with my podcast. And even just the building something with somebody else was something that I was enjoying. It wasn't like a selfish thing. So I always give that advice too. Like you've got to like want it and want to help people and want to improve your own life. And it shouldn't just be this like goal of making money or becoming some huge podcaster.
Yeah, we're very similar. It's funny how similar we are. Yeah, I mean, I bet if you were to look at podcasters who have been doing it for more than 5 years, we'd probably find the commonality that we share. The mission was first, and the channel, the means, was second. I bet we would find that common because I think there's like a stat that I see passed around a lot that 99% of podcasts release less than like 10 episodes or something. Like people give up so fast. Yeah, it's a crazy number. And, it's probably because of a couple of things here. The mission, the lack of maybe immediate results, like all these things that, derail people.
Totally. Okay, let's move on to your latest book. You released it last year. It's called That's Bold of You. So similar to mindfulness, you can interpreted in many different ways. So what does being bold mean to you?
Yeah, so I wrote that book in the face of, I'm an author and I read on Instagram. Like my whole day is about words, like word choice, 12, 14 word, short little sentences. So I live in words. And on that note, over the years, I've really leaned into trying to break down the identities that we give ourselves, specifically the words that we use to describe ourselves. Those are either words that other people have called us. You're too much, you're too needy, you're too intense, you're too quiet, you're too loud, across the board, these things, and that we've internalized and say, well, maybe I am. And the way that we let perception, right? The way that we let feedback, the way that we let our parents, the way we let the internet basically create our identities for us unless we push back. So I think it's a bold thing. That's why I called it It's Bold of You, to allow yourself to push back against these identities and decide that, well, maybe they are true. Maybe you are too intense, but maybe that is a good thing for XYZ reason. So basically it's a mindful examination of who you are and why you are that way. And, really the reason I wrote the book was I'm all in on vulnerability. Clearly not like sappy vulnerability, not like feelings time vulnerability, but just being radically honest about how you feel. So we don't have to beat around the bush. So we don't have to guess. We don't have to play mental gymnastics. None of that, whether it's in dating or business or friends or just with yourself. We say how we feel and we act upon how we feel, and we're clear and we're healthy about it. Vulnerability. Right? Vulnerability.
Yeah.
I read this study that really kicked off the book called the Beautiful Mess Effect, which was basically these social scientists and these researchers were looking at the fact that like we applaud certain qualities in other people. Like we like weird, wild, eccentric people. We like honest people. We like that friend who's like, oh, he's or she's so real. Like he's got no filter. We love that. In general, right? Not on the extreme. So in general, we like people who are real, a little out there, quirky, a little too loud, a little too this. We like that in other people. But for some reason, when we think about ourselves being that same way, we pass so much unfair judgment upon ourselves. And we say, well, I can't be that way because people won't appreciate that quality in me, even though we've said we like that quality in other people. So the beautiful mess effect was basically saying, well, why do we applaud the beautiful mess in other people, but in ourselves, we detest it? And they ran all these participants through these studies to basically show that across the board, there's a bit of hypocrisy there. There was one instance where they took these two groups of people. They had one group and said, hey, you're about to go into this room and there's going to be a group of people in there and you're going to sing this song to them. You've never sang this song before. It's going to be awkward. You're going to go in there and sing it. The other group, they said, hey, by the way, these people are going to come in and sing a song to you. And right before they did it, they asked each group, hey, how do you think this is going to be received? The group that was told that they're about to sing, they were like, well, this is going to be horrible. They're going to laugh at me. They're going to think I'm an idiot. They're going to hate me, so on and so forth. Very condemning, very judgmental. To the group that they told, hey, you're about to have these people come sing to you. What do you think? How are you going to react? They said, well, it doesn't really matter. I applaud them for doing that. That's awkward. That's vulnerable. Like, I applaud that. I like that. So basically showcasing the idea that we're all in our heads about these vulnerable things. And then they ran other tests too about asking for help, kind of exposing your body in a vulnerable way, expressing your feelings first, all these different vulnerable acts. And across the board, it was always, they will hate it if I do it. But across the board, the judgment was, this is a great thing. And that always really struck me as just like a glimpse into humanity of a little bit how hypocritical we are when it comes to judging ourselves for these things that are unfair. So basically, I wrote the book from that perspective, that it's a bold thing to push back against our programming, our conditioning, our judgment. So it's basically a book about being kinder to yourself, but in an informed way, and to not be so conforming in life.
Yeah. I want to dig deeper on being vulnerable. And I want to talk about dating for a second, because I feel like that with dating is especially relevant right now, because in the online dating world, a lot of people have the impression that they've got to be kind of cold, maybe not make the first move necessarily, especially if they're a woman, or not show their softer side because they're afraid of being hurt, right? They don't want to get ghosted. They don't want bad things to happen. So can you talk to us about how being vulnerable can actually be something that is attractive, and maybe talk to us about how we should rethink that?
Yeah, I'll answer that. I'll answer that in the traditional way I do, but I'll actually add some very, very recent sauce to that. I released an episode yesterday because I read this piece of research in the Harvard Business Review about why optimism in life literally makes you happier, it makes you more money, and it makes you more fulfilled. I see vulnerability and optimism as two sides of the same coin. And basically the research showed, and HBR, of course, is about in the workplace. So it's about workplace professionals earning more, being happier, and being more fulfilled. And it basically showed that cynics, people who are cynical, right? Cynical in the sense of everyone's out to get me. I need to protect myself first. I only match energy, a little bit of Machiavellian tactics, right? A little bit of manipulation, little dog, dog eat dog kind of world. They showed that people who believe that about the world, that people are inherently dishonest and that maybe you should play some games too. People who believe that the world is competitive and you need to, step on some people's necks to be successful. They showed that those people are across the board, they earn less than their optimistic counterparts. They're promoted less than their optimistic counterparts. And across the board, they showed less satisfaction in their jobs. I take that as a microcosm of larger happiness, right? I think there's definitely a lot to be said about the workplace versus life, but they showed that to be very true. And the suggestion of the research was make trust your default and you'll earn more, you'll be promoted more, and you'll be happier. And there's a fine line between being trustful and being naive, but it basically said, look for the best in others, offer your energy first instead of only being the person who receives and waits to see what they do and then you make your move because everyone's got to move. Said instead of all that crap, you just make trust your default and you be a kind, hopeful, optimistic person, which is very much in my ethos. But I think that is a very relevant way to approach dating. I think we've all gotten into our heads and our hearts in different ways that have made us so resistant to being open. And a lot of it's for a good reason, right? If we've been hurt in the past, maybe multiple times, maybe it happens to us so many times when we've been disappointed so many times, we can't help but feel that the whole world is that way. I would never dismiss that, of course, because our experiences shape our reality. But a lot of the time, we're taking little tidbits of our reality, which is real and valid and hurtful, and we're adding to it a whole variety of projection to everyone else. And that leads to a lot of the things, that you described and that I talk a lot about, right? We want someone else to make the first move, or we don't trust anyone at first. We're resistant to speaking up for our needs. All these things that just back us further into that cycle. So, there's not much great advice I can give other than don't do that, but perhaps with a bit of the research and then a little bit of logic. Like I do a lot of dating content. I don't ever do dating content around tactics or how to get someone. What do I freaking know? But I do know when it comes to the idea of vulnerability in dating, you win every time when you're vulnerable. I really, really do believe that. And most practically, when I say vulnerable, I mean speaking up for yourself, advocating for yourself, saying, here's what I need, asking questions, speaking up to how you feel. 99% of the times when I receive feedback or questions from people, all of the things that they talk about are solvable through communication. I know it's a boring topic, but the way that I really break it down about vulnerability in dating is anytime you speak up, anytime you're vulnerable, you either get one of two things, and both of those things always help you win. Anytime you speak up, you either get what you want or you get what you need. Both of those things always help you. You either get what you want. You speak up and say, hey, you said this thing. It makes me feel a certain way. What are your intentions? You get what you want. They say, oh, sorry, that was confusing. Here's what I actually mean. Turns out you're on the same page. Amazing. You just needed to talk it out. On the get what you need side, you say, hey, that thing you did or this thing I'm noticing about your behavior, what does it mean? Let's talk about this. They say, oh, yeah, no, you're right. You caught me. I'm not really into this. I've been messing with you, whatever. That hurts a lot, but you got what you need because now you can move on and you're not in that holding pattern anymore. And I know that's oversimplified and it's not as easy as just snapping your fingers, having a conversation, but that is vulnerability in its most practical form. And for me, mindfulness isn't always this soft butterflies and rainbows thing. Sometimes it's mantra. It's case right now you're feeling confused or trapped in this relationship, or you're feeling used or whatever negative feeling. Get what you want or get what you need. Case, get what you want, get what you need, get what you want, get what you need. It's like motivate yourself to have that conversation because you understand what's on the opposite side of that. So that's what I would say, a combination of those two things. Like make trust your default. Be soft and fluffy on the outside. Don't take any shit on the inside. Speak to what you want, get what you need. And I think that'll really help people get out of this funk where it's them against the world, which I think just doesn't benefit anyone.
Yeah, I really, really love that framing. Buy low, sell high. Buy low, sell high. It's a simple concept, but not necessarily an easy concept. Right now, high interest rates have crushed the real estate market. Prices are falling and properties are available at a discount, which means Fundrise believes now is the time to expand to the Fundrise Flagship Fund's billion-dollar real estate portfolio. You can add the Fundrise Flagship Fund to your portfolio in minutes by visiting fundrise.com/profiting. That's fundrise.com/profiting. Carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the Fundrise Flagship Fund before investing. This and other information can be found at Fund's prospectus at fundrise.com/profiting. This is a paid advertisement. Something else I wanted to pick your brain about is your perspective on how we should frame our past. I always say that you need a happy past and you need an exciting future if you want to live like a content life where you're not anxious and you're feeling positive. You need a happy past, an exciting future. I'd love for you to help us understand how we should think about our past and how we should treat our past.
Well, certainly, there's areas of life that I love to talk about. I don't particularly like to talk about like past traumas and things like that. That's for a serious mental health care professional. For me, though, I think about my past as the ultimate piece of clarity in my life. I hate to, why do I hate to? I love to oversimplify things. But you think about like, why are certain things good? Because of the bad things. Like, what makes a healthy love? Unfortunately, unhealthy love. What makes a communicative, understanding, patient partner? Someone who always rushed you. Someone who never took time to understand you. Like, the unfortunate reality of life is we need contrast. We do. And it's, it's one of those things that like in the midst of contrast, you would never say, I need this contrast. This is good. Like we need this. Like we needed rain today. It's been dry out. Like we don't think like that when it comes to pain. We are wired to avoid pain. And most specifically, we are wired to avoid repeated pain. We will do anything to avoid making the same mistake twice. Perhaps that's what leads us to be so closed off to our previous point. But our pasts are powerful. Our pasts are the source of contrast, which is the source of clarity in our life. I talk a lot about standards and boundaries and fear that a lot of people have of being too picky. I've had a conversation around that 99% of the time that comes up. I don't want to be too picky. It's like, well, okay, well, let's figure out if you're being too picky or not. Let's figure out if that's actually a valid thing. I talk to people and I sometimes break down standards into like standards 1.0 and standards 2.0. Standards 1.0 are like theoretical standards that you'll borrow from TikTok, right? You deserve someone who does this and does that, like things that are inspired by other people's examples, things that sound good on paper, things that your parents told you. Back to our original conversation, just because someone said something's right for them doesn't mean it's right for you. That's standard 1.0. It's good. We're not going to argue with it. We're not going to say that's not true. Standards 2.0 come from your experiences. I lived through this past painful experience in my past. Here is why I believe my standard to be true. When you have a past that validates your standard, I consider that to be rather unbreakable and a non-negotiable for yourself. And that's why in the present, you could look yourself in the mirror and you're on that line where you're being like, man, maybe I am being too needy and I'm asking for too much. No, point to the past. This is why I have that standard. And that's what makes it powerful. So if we're not taking advantage of our past in that sense, again, we're just floating. We're just floating with these theoretical things that aren't backed by why. So it sucks to have painful experiences. Of course, I've been through my fair share, loss, breakups across the board, but those are the things that make clarity in the present possible. And that's what transforms into the type of relationships you want, the ones you're willing to fight for, the ones that you're willing to walk away from, the times you're willing to start over. Like you need that clarity. And if we don't look at our past as a source of it, we're basically throwing away all of this goodness in our life that we have.
I love everything that you said. And something else that I want to touch on is ego. So with ego, a lot of us think that it's bad, right? We just assume that ego is the enemy. We need to kind of fight off anything that is related to ego. Why do you think that there's some positives related to our ego?
I think in general, ego is the enemy. Like Mr. Ryan Holiday is correct. Like boastful, better than thou ego, of course, is bad. Thinking you know everything is bad. Mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, the more mindful you are, the more you meditate, the more you have mindful practice, the more you journal, the more you realize you don't know. It is a very humbling practice, and it should be. honestly, that's the best sign you're on the right track. Honestly, it's like you're more unsure of yourself from time to time. Like that is the greatest sign that you're doing things right. But I would say along the way, it's like there's a healthy side of the ego. And it's not even ego. I think I dress it up as ego because it's easy to understand, and we can kind of create the visual of two sides of the ego. But
Mm.
all it is faith. It's faith in yourself that you should have some confidence, a little bit of swag, that no one's out of your league, that no business objectives out of your reach, that you could do these things. You could put yourself in a position to at least try. And the humility side is no matter what happens, you can handle it. And I just think in the day and age of social media and comparison and conformity and what if isms, we're so quick to talk ourselves out of things because of all these things that we've been talking about. I'm to this, I'm to that, they're this, I'm that we talk ourselves out of trying in the first place. And it's in those instances where I think we need the healthy side of ego. The
Yeah.
catalyst, the spark for just trying, right? This isn't I'm not reinventing the wheel here with talking about just motivating yourself to try, but like I like people who have a little bit of swag and confidence, but it's balanced wholeheartedly by humility. They're willing to put themselves into situations where they're cringe, where they're weird, where they're awkward, where they're vulnerable. Only good things come from that. And if we only think of ego and confidence as this thing for that is a negative, I find a lot of times we don't even put ourselves in those positions. So I think, it's a matter of humility, but it's also a matter of believing that no matter where you put yourself, you can react to what happens next. And that's the healthy side of ego.
I was listening to an interview with you and James Altucher a couple days ago, and you guys were talking about how luck is similar to faith, which I thought was like just a really cool way to think about it, that luck is very similar to how you would think of faith. How can we make ourselves more lucky? What are some ways that we kind of can break the rut that we're in, the routine that we're in, to try to bring more luck into our lives?
I like the idea of luck as faith. And I like the idea of luck and faith and patience being intertwined, right? Like when you give yourself patience, that is saying, I have faith in myself, right? When you're saying, I don't need to rush to do this. I don't need to conform to someone else's timeline. I just need to keep doing what I'm doing. That is faith in yourself. And that is what creates luck. There's a book that I reference quite a bit that has been passed around a little bit that talks about luck. I'm blanking on the author of it, but it's called Chase Chance and Creativity, the Lucky Art of Novelty. And it's basically written by this scientist professor who was talking about the role that luck has played in some great scientific breakthroughs, right? Specifically luck in the lab, like the invention of pasteurization and Louis Pasteur and the invention of penicillin. Like these were like technically like mistakes that were made in the lab when they just like randomly did things. Not a scientist, so don't know the exacts, but like they randomly mixed things together and something great happened, right? It was luck. It wasn't part of the plan, it was luck. And basically the scientist looked over the years, over the many decades and centuries of luck in the lab, and he said luck is actually categorizable. It's something we could break down, and it's something we can't control. And he said there's 4 kinds of luck. And one luck is the kind of luck that I think we're all so apt to identify by. And for me, I used to think, well, I'm an unlucky person, right? I've never won a lottery. I always hit red lights. Like if something bad can happen, it tends to happen to me. That's the kind of luck that we need to ignore. That's random luck. Like we don't really care about random luck. We can't control it. It is what it is. But there's 3 other kinds of luck that he identified in the lab that I think is very immediately transferable to life. The first was luck that comes from experience and association. Basically, the more you do something, the wiser you get about it, such that in the future you make better decisions. You're able to quickly form more mental associations of if this, then that, and you just have better results. It's luck that comes from wisdom, right? So for me, it's like with writing quotes. I've written, 1,000 on Instagram. I kind of know what people want. I know what makes people feel seen. So people like, I posted something yesterday. Today it's got like 90,000 likes. That's a lot of likes.
Yeah.
That's a little bit lucky. The algorithm lucked me today. Well, kind of. It was just a little bit of association. So that was luck 1. The other luck was luck that comes from motion. Can't deny that, right? The more you do, the luckier you get. Objects in motion stay in motion. Objects in motion bump into other objects in motion. The more you do, the more podcasts you release, the more music you release, the more cold calls you make, literally the luckier you get. People, for some reason, we conflate luck with being irregardless of effort, but luck is truly effort.
Yeah.
And then the last luck that he broke down was luck that comes from like uniqueness, originality, authenticity. Just the fact that the more real you are, the luckier you get in the sense that people can detect that. Like some of the examples with like, if you have blue hair, right, and that's like authentic to you and your expression, it strikes up a conversation with someone. Oh, and they're an editor for Vogue and you want to be a fashion model, like things like that. Luck that comes from originality and authenticity that in very practical ways, whether it's a conversation in an elevator or something you post, it shines through, it attracts the right people and you get lucky. But it comes from that level of realness. So yeah, I like thinking about luck in that sense because I used to really victimize myself as an unlucky person. And of course, that's not true. And that's unfair. Back to the idea of that's bold of you and vulnerability. It's an unfair thing to say I'm an unlucky person. You could break yourself free of being unlucky by being real, by leaning on your past for those associations, and then for doing more, of course. But all those things combined are faith, and they all require patience. So I think it all fits nicely.
Something that I think ties with this is your advice that you give that you got from Seinfeld about doing the opposite. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. I for being in the mental health space, I talk a lot about Seinfeld. It might come out of left field unless people watch Seinfeld. I think there's a lot of wise ideas in Seinfeld. But yeah, I've done a bunch of episodes, and I talked about it in my book about the idea of you're feeling stuck in a rut, you're feeling ambiguous, you're feeling trapped. I think the best thing you could do is just try the opposite of what you've been doing, whether it's a habit, a routine, a mindset, a standard, a boundary, right? We're not talking about going back to zero, but just throwing things to the wall and trying something different. Because there was an episode in Seinfeld where George, who is like Jerry's kind of short king friend who, is an unlucky person, he's not conventionally attractive, he's not wealthy, he's kind of neurotic, right? He doesn't have any luck with women. And so they're talking, and Jerry's like, and George is like, I always, nothing ever good happens to me. I always make the wrong choice. And Jerry's like, well, if every choice you've ever made to date has been wrong, then what would happen if you did the opposite of that? And then he gets up from his seat at this table and he walks up to this attractive woman at the bar and he goes, hi, my name's George. I'm unemployed and I live with my parents. And she's like, hello. And they hit it off and they go on a date. So it's just a funny example of him, instead of like trying to fake it and be this Rico Suave guy, he gets up and he's just very honest with her. And it's the opposite of how he'd normally react. And I've always taken that to heart. Like in my early sales days, I had to be the opposite of who I was at the time, called a fake it till you make it mentality. I had to get up and be that funny guy and take clients out and do all those things. But that helped mold me into actually becoming that person. And, in so many areas of life, I used to be a pretty avoidant attachment type when it came to relationships and like being willing to sit in that space of discomfort, the opposite. On the entrepreneurial front, again, my upbringing has always been very traditional. You make money in traditional ways. You max out your 401k to do the opposite of those things really pushed me out of my comfort zone. But here we are. So I think a very piece of practical advice is dip your toe in the water of opposites and see what it brings you.
So good. So something else that you talk about is being comfortable with embarrassment. I thought this one was really funny because I've never really thought about that. But you say you're even competitive with yourself about being as embarrassing as possible. You challenge yourself to be embarrassing. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, I'm a real clown over here. Yeah, I mean, it's less like trying to be embarrassed and more a willingness to be embarrassed. And for me, it's like to this idea of like pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, doing opposites. Like a way that I've done it in the past was to kind of like gamify the experience. Not so overtly, like I'm literally gamifying it, but like you think about confidence, right? Where does confidence come from? Confidence comes from, without a doubt, evidence, right? Confidence can be theoretical at a certain point, but in order to make that confidence real, you need to generate evidence that you could trip and fall and still be confident, evidence that you could start and fail and pivot and still do well, right? That is what creates confidence. It's a muscle. It's evidence-based. So I always thought about it in the sense of, well, how do you create evidence? You got to get points on the board. So I always used to treat it that anytime I did something awkward or embarrassing or cringe or uncomfortable, in my head, I would give myself a point, right? Like a ticket at a county fair, and that I would redeem that for like a big stuffed animal, right? In my head. It's the same idea for confidence. Like, how do you gain confidence? Well, you cash in those points. And at a certain point, to our conversation about healthy ego, at a certain point, you're like, I could put myself in any position. I could be the one to say a funny joke and have it fall on deaf ears. I could be the one to introduce myself to someone and they can dismiss me, but I'm still confident. I still am in that situation. I'm not less of a person, and it comes from that evidence. So for me, back to our conversation about motivating yourself to get what you want or get what you need, that amps me up to have a difficult conversation. It's the same idea when it comes to confidence. It amps me up to do something that is potentially awkward or embarrassing or vulnerable because I know what it gives me. We're so focused on what it takes from us, right? It takes from us our pride and our respect, or maybe even a friend. I'm more focused on what it gives me, which is those things, those exact same things. And it's really helped me evolve my thinking there from, I don't want to be cringe. That used to be like my biggest roadblock, especially when it comes to being a guy who literally writes potentially cringe things on the internet, is I can't be cringe. Why? Why is that a fear of mine? What am I afraid of being judged by people who think being real and open and honest is a cringy thing? That's a cringe thing, that they would judge that. So I've really kind of evolved my thinking there, focused on what being awkward and embarrassing gives you versus what it takes from you.
Yeah, fam, I'm not a finance person. I'm a make money person. I love to innovate, create, and sell. I don't like to do the boring finance stuff. So I've offloaded all those responsibilities to my business partner. And so I basically handed a mess over to him. He inherited a lot of different apps, and he would always complain about all these disparate apps. And so we were looking for a more streamlined solution where all of our banking and bookkeeping would be in one place. And we found that with Found. Yes, it's called Found, which is very fitting. Found is a banking and bookkeeping app that is especially made for solopreneurs and entrepreneurs. It's made for us. And Found has amazing features. You can do everything from invoicing to bookkeeping to tax planning. One of my favorite features on Found is that it will actually automatically estimate the taxes that you owe and then set aside money for that. This is so important because oftentimes you spend your tax money unknowingly and then you're hit with a bill, and that ain't pretty. In addition to that cool feature, one of my other favorite features is the fact that you can create virtual cards and then set spending limits on them. Now we have virtual cards that we're able to give out to our employees. There's no way they can overspend. Found is super cost effective. There's no hidden charges and there's no minimum balances. Plus, it's everything in one app. So that in itself is a lot of cost savings. You can save hundreds or even thousands of dollars by switching everything to Found. If you want to try it for free, that's right. You can try it for free at found.com/profiting. That's FOUND.com/profiting, found.com/profiting to try Found for free. Found is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services are provided by Piermont Bank, member FDIC. Found's core features are free. They also offer an optional paid product, Found Plus. Okay, as we close out this interview, I want to start talking more about your career and your Instagram and things like that. I know that you now are merging mindfulness with music. You have been for a little while now. Talk to us about why you decided to do that and how personally has that made you feel to be able to combine both of these passions? Like, do you feel more fulfilled now that you can kind of merge these passions?
Yes. So, I mean, I love house music. I've always loved house music. Growing up in Chicago, now I'm in Miami. Like, just love dance music, any genre of dance music. So that's part one. Part two would be, back to my passion for mindfulness as a subject matter. I think a lot of my hesitation towards it in my 20s was because I used to think that vulnerability, mindfulness, mental health, journaling, therapy, those are things for sad people. That is something you do when you're sad and you're overwhelmed, and it is for broken people, right? Ridiculous statement. But I think that's how I used to think. And I think a lot of people think that too now, particularly with the language we use around mental health and stigmas and all these things. There still is this connotation that it's for sad people. And, I don't take a whole lot very seriously in life. I think some of my quotes kind of reflect that. But I've always wanted to encourage people to see mindfulness as something that you celebrate. It is a journey inward to celebrate who you are. It is something that you do when you're happy, not just when you're sad. It's for both, of course. But I've really always been drawn towards the energetic side of mindfulness, not the sit in silence and meditate, not the sound bath and meditate kind of guy. That's great for some people. It's never been great for me. I always get the most mental breakthroughs when I listen to dance music. There's something about the structure of dance music. For one, break, build, drop, break, build, drop. It drop. It's very euphoric. It's very journey driven. I've never written anything of substance without listening to dance music. So I've always had this like creative and emotional connection to dance music. And I was like, at a certain point, a couple of years ago, I was like, well, let me bring this into some of my practices. So I started working with different DJs, and I would have them on the show where they would play a set. Like I would have Martin Garrix on, and he would play for 60 minutes. And then the great thing about dance music is there's usually like transitions between the songs where it's somewhat easy to kind of come in with a vocal or a piece of audio. And I would come in and just kind of do a little of my usual mindfulness, but over 130 BPM banger house tune. And, it's not for everyone. Certainly a lot of people don't really get it. They would rather, do the quiet, calm mindfulness. But I think a lot of people are leaning towards mindfulness as something that excites you. Mindfulness, that's something that you could do while you're moving your body. And I don't know, it's more of a creative outlet for me than anything I really do with my business. And, I live in Miami now, and my girlfriend is a DJ here. So it's part of my life. Like I spend a fair amount of time in clubs here, but I don't really drink. So I just enjoy the ability for music to be a catalyst for vulnerability, whether that's in person or in an episode or with a DJ. I just think there's such an inherent, powerful connection between music and mindfulness that I at least have to put it out into the world. And I enjoy doing it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of my listeners are going to want to hear some of that. Where can they hear your mindfulness music?
Yeah, they're all on the podcast. So if you go to New Mindset, who does on Spotify or Apple, and just scroll through, you'll see the cover art's different for them. So there's one I did with Martin Garrix. There's one I did with two friends, a bunch of different DJs who are a little bit smaller, but they're great. So if you want to give it a shot, listen to it and see how you feel.
That's awesome, because I'm somebody who has ADHD. So I like doing mindfulness with like yoga and like matching it with different things. So I think it's really a really cool thing. All right. Yeah. So your Instagram, couple questions on your Instagram, because you've managed to build such an awesome Instagram. And nowadays everyone's saying like, it's all about Instagram reels. You've got to do your reels, but you're having so much success posting quotes and thoughts and sliders. And I'm curious to understand, where did you come up with this strategy and why do you think it works so well?
Yeah, I'll address the video versus static in a second, because I always think about that. Well, I mean, it was during COVID, again, a big breakthrough time for me creatively, because I literally had more time on my hands. I was sitting in my apartment and I was like, I want to promote the podcast. How do I get more people to listen to podcasts? I was like, well, I got to post on social. And I was like, well, for one, if I talk for 20 minutes on the podcast, how can I show that I really understand it? Well, simplicity is the way to show you understand something. So I was like, how can I take something on the podcast that's a complex conversation, boil it down to one sentence? So I really forced myself to be creative in that sense. And then two, I was like, well, I don't want to just do, one by one and do a little Canva digital mock-up. I was like, there's got to be something more real. And at the time, I had these coffee cups in front of me. So I started writing on coffee cups with a pen. And those did really well. At the time, there weren't a whole lot of people doing like handwritten stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I started writing on pieces of paper, and I lived in downtown Chicago. So I had the backdrop, and I would just start posting them all over. And then I also, understood the algorithm somewhat well and saw the power of carousels, and not just the power of carousels, but the power of series. So to like have one idea, but to say it in 8 or 9 or 10 different ways so that people would scroll through and find different ones that they relate to. And yeah, the rest is history. I mean, I write them all by hand. I still do, even though now I generally just write on a white piece of paper with my pen, and then I take a photo of it. People's preferences changed. I think people like the simplicity and the minimalism of just a white piece of paper, but I love my red pen. I love doing it. For me, it's a noble creative quest to ensure that I can distill down like a conversation like this into a short sentence. I'm an adamant believer in the power of mantras and affirmations, to have these things that you believe, pieces of clarity that you could put human language behind. Mm-hmm. We opened up with talking about learning to talk to yourself, not just listen to yourself. So this is my way to encourage people to do that. People tattoo my quotes. It's crazy stuff. But then to your question, yeah, everyone's always like, Case, like, why don't you do more reels? Like, sit down and do reels. I just like to write. I really do. And at the end of the day, at the end of the day, even if I were to get on a reel and basically read one of my quotes, but just say it, it's going to get shared much more if it's already written down. I've tested that a million times, like at least in my world. Maybe I'm not don't have the right production value, or I'm not handsome enough to really grab the algo's attention. I don't know. But for me, I like to write things down because they're so much more shareable and people
Yeah, they
remember
are
it so much more
shareable.
because they can actually see it. Like reels are great. And obviously video is the future on social media. But for when it comes to the type of material that I really want to evangelize and help spread, short written quotes for me just speaks my truth and people remember them. And that's what I want. I don't want a quick hit of dopamine that comes from a nice reel. I want the longevity that comes from a piece of affirmation that people take with them and print out or tattoo or all these crazy things I've seen people do with things that I've written. So I will continue to be the quote guy and hope
Yeah.
people continue to receive them.
And you're so good at it. I mean, everybody loves your quotes, and it goes back to being true to yourself. You're not trying to be somebody else. You're not trying to be something that everybody else wants you to be or expects you to be. You're just doing your own thing, and that's magnetic to other people. So if you had to pick one of these quotes to stick up on your fridge, you've got hundreds and hundreds of them. What would you pick?
I don't know. I wrote one a while ago where I just said redirection is an upgrade. I like that a lot. Back to everything we're talking about here, faith, patience, luck, vulnerability, our past, clarity, our ability to see a detour, a failure, a flop, a piece of redirection as opening another door as opposed to closing all the doors. I really like that. It's optimistic thinking for sure, but you read that enough and you're in the moment and someone dismisses you or you're rejected. It's like, oh, that stings, but redirection is an upgrade. Let me see where this is pointing me to. So I like that one, and it's short and sweet.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, I end my podcast with 2 questions I ask all of my guests. The first one is, what is one actionable thing our young and profiters can do today to become more profitable tomorrow?
I'll just go with the obvious here. I would start journaling, truthfully. Like, even from a business perspective, it gives you clarity in what to do next, which I think is the ultimate thing. As long as you could find things to do next, you will inevitably be profitable, whether that's emotionally profitable, mentally profitable, profitable on paper. I really do advocate for a guided journaling habit.
In terms of, you said a guided journaling habit. So what are some resources that you recommend?
So, I've made and sell a variety of guided journals. You're welcome to pick them up. You don't have to. There's great ones out there that aren't mine. I would just recommend finding a journal that asks different questions every day. Because I find that sometimes we get into this performative journaling mode where it's like, I'm grateful for this, or 3 things I did today. It's like, those are great, of course, but it needs to be alongside of a powerful, intention-driven question that dives into your past. I think that's the most powerful way. So find a journal that has, calibrating questions, some gratitude exercises I think are great, but find one that hits hard with specific different questions every day so you don't get comfortable. The point of journaling is not to reinforce what you believe. It's not. It's to make you uncomfortable, to evolve your thinking. So whether that's through my journal, someone else's, create your own prompts if you're creative, just focus on the power of and depth of the question.
Got it. Okay, cool. And what do you say is your secret to profiting in life? And this can go beyond the topic of today's episode.
Yeah, I would say consistency. Truly, whether that's consistency in the gym or with my business or my podcast or, I'm big on doing difficult things. I am a David Goggins stan in that respect. Like, do the difficult things. If it's difficult, you have to do it. Just do the freaking difficult thing. I'm like really big on it, whether that's physically or emotionally, or I don't want to do another episode. No, do the difficult thing. So I'd say it's that. I'm a sucker for doing the difficult thing consistently because I've just seen what happens when you're consistent with those things that most people don't want to do. And it sets you apart. Not that I'm apart from everyone else and there's me. It sets me apart from older versions of myself, which is the person that I compete with. So do the difficult things, do them consistently.
Well, this was such an amazing conversation. I really appreciate your time. Where can everybody learn more about you and everything that you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love talking about myself, but it was cool to see how much we have in common as well. So thanks so much for having me. Case.Kenny on Instagram. The podcast is called New Mindset Who Dis, everywhere you listen to pods. Books, journals, newmindsetwhodis.com.
Amazing. We'll stick all those links in the show notes. Case, thank you so much.
Thank you.